You know, I am constantly asked a lot of questions with regard to the practice of Taiji itself. And one of the questions which my students often ask me is, can I practice Taiji as a Christian? Now, that I believe is a little bit of a complex question, but if I had to answer it directly and simply, my answer would be yes. Of course, everyone would have an opinion about this. There are people who would say you shouldn't practice Tai Chi, you shouldn't practice yoga if you're a Christian. What I would say is you have to be cautious in the sense that if you have to practice them, it's best to practice them with a teacher who's not trying to take you away from the religion that you have chosen for yourself. But as to whether Tai Chi or yoga are religions in themselves, I would say no. Um, you can practice them and totally believe in your religion, minus those aspects of religion which are just cultural. Because there's a difference between spirituality and religion, I should say. Um, Religion is organized, spirituality, usually organized by a group of people who have a particular worldview and who would wish to maintain their worldview. At the same time, most religions have been influenced in one way or another by governments, dominant governments. And so when you practice Christianity, for example, you're required to believe that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior, and that He is the way and the life, and that no one can go to God through except through Him. Now, will your practice of Taiji Chuan change this for you? I would say no, because Taiji Chuan is not out to give you a religion or a God. The first aim of the practice of Taiji is to improve your health. And because we do not distinguish between mental health and physical health in the practice of Tai Chi, this is the entrance to our living area. It's a nice new fountain here. So, as I was saying, because we do not distinguish in the practice of Taiji and QiGong between physical health and mental health, what happens is that if you practice Taiji to deal with a physiological problem, you will notice that a mental problem, or should I say a spiritual problem, has also been solved. If, for example, you are suffering from liver disease, according to Chinese medicine and Tai Chi practice, there certainly is something wrong with your liver and or your gallbladder. Now, you will agree with me that an anger problem would be considered from a Christian perspective to be a spiritual problem, you know? So it's a perspective, a spiritual perspective. Anger is a spiritual problem. That's a perspective. Is it a physical problem? Yes, that's also a perspective. We see that as liver disease, but liver disease has a spiritual consequence. Because your organ is impaired, your spirit will also be dysfunctional, and you will have anger issues, irritability, and so on. Now, if you have a problem with your kidneys, according to TCM again, you would have issues with with anger. So you'd have anger issues, you'd suffer from that. And so, again, from a Christian perspective, yes, this is a spiritual problem. But for the person practicing Tai Chi, they are not necessarily approaching this from a spiritual perspective. They are probably, more probably, looking at this from a purely physical perspective. So I'm going to treat my liver because it's uncomfortable, but when I do treat my liver, I realize I'm no longer as irritable or as angry as I used to be. And maybe some issues between my wife and myself, or the husband and the wife, or with the kids, or other family members and friends, these issues have been essentially resolved as a result. So, yes. And even in the case where people lose their minds, what we commonly refer to as bipolar disorder, or, you know, the common man would call this madness, to put it that way. Yeah, there are some cases where, without intending to actually treat that, Chinese medicine, Qigong, Tai Chi, and so on, could impact that to the point where those symptoms no longer are there anymore. Because, I'm not saying all, but a lot of our psychological or mental issues stem from physiological problems which we have. Certainly not all, like I said, but then quite a number of them. And so, yes, there is that. But Tai Chi requires that we learn to focus our minds, you know. So, as the practice goes and one relaxes, we learn how to focus the mind. And as we focus our minds, we become less and less distracted. And our emotions increasingly become stable. These stable emotions do transform us, and we are, in the end, not the same people as we once were. We change. Now, I will speak for myself. Being a Christian, I would say, having been raised as one, obeying Jewish laws from my childhood until I essentially grew up, keeping the Sabbath, Friday sunset, Saturday sunset, not eating pork, not eating shrimp, and all that kind of stuff. Yes, I grew up like that. Even though we said we were Christian, but yeah. Now, what happens is when you start to practice Tai Chi, gradually your ego starts receding. So it's chipping away at your ego step by step. And as time goes by, you come to realize that there is not that much of your own original ego left. So you experience less and less of a tendency to want to prove yourself to others. At the same time, you are not so impressed by anyone any longer, and you're not easily insulted by anyone either. So naturally, the result would be that you start to question everything, which to me is a good thing. No matter how good anything is, I think it's always a safe thing to be able to question them, you know, and ensure that whatever we have chosen to believe is actually worth believing in. So, yeah, this will happen. You will start to question everything, including your religious beliefs. And because your ego is taking more and more of a back seat, your levels of lucidity will grow. And you will start to see in what you were taught what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And naturally, because you have lost the fear of being punished and lost the desire to be praised, you're likely to end up making your own mind regarding many of those issues which I mentioned. Now, for some people, if they had had a lot of doubts about their religion prior to this, It might lead you to a place where you actually temporarily or permanently stop associating with this religion. For the majority of people, I think not. They probably will not get there. And for some people, though, they could. But this can happen without ever practicing Taiji at all. Now, the thing is, this energy aspect. With the practice of Tai Chi, very shortly, you will start to feel your energy in your palms, in your body. Feel it flow. Feel the energy of the air. Feel the energy of the universe. I call it energy because that's what is taught. And then, over time, you may start to realize that this energy sounds a lot similar to what is known as spirit, as per your religious beliefs. Then you realize what you're initially experiencing is your own human spirit. Call it your mind, call it your subconscious, call it your spirit, whatever it is. There is something that you can kind of touch, kind of see, and kind of hear. And yet it's not material. And which can be pulled, pushed, and you start to realize, hey, this might actually be my human spirit that I can now feel and experience clearly. So I do have a spirit. In this sense, it might reinforce your beliefs. And then you will find that when your ego recedes, this sense of self, so to speak, kind of blends into a larger universal sense of self. When this goes on for a while, you start to realize, hey, rightfully or wrongfully, this feels and sounds a lot like all the descriptions of the Holy Spirit in the Bible. As to whether this is or not, I would leave each and everyone to draw their own conclusions. But in my case, I found I became more peaceful, more loving, more forgiving, including of my own self. And I lost a whole bunch of all the negative traits which I used to battle with for so long, even using prayers and all kinds of things and which didn't work. And all of this without any effort whatsoever. Also, I realized that after practicing for a long time, my thoughts started to become reality faster and faster. I think something, it happens. So the power of positive thinking, if you will, that power grows with Tai Chi. And now, for many people, I think you may just feel that, oh, Tai Chi and Qigong have helped me to understand my religion better. But if you go back to many Christian churches or so, you might find that there is a lot of opposition to what you're doing or what you have to say. Why? Well, because I think that somehow it seems to challenge a lot of tenets which have been taught you there by people who, for the most part, do not have any true spiritual experience, but just read the Bible word for word and try to explain something which they have no understanding of. It's like trying to explain life in the water when one is not a fish. So, personally, if I had to give advice, I would say, regardless of what your religious background is, do some Tai Chi. It will help you to understand your religion better. It is not a religion itself. All that it does is it relaxes you more, gives you better health, focuses your mind more, and that mind becomes better at understanding things because your ego is pushed to the back burner. One starts to distinguish between illusion and reality in a better way. So, what is real? What is true? You start to realize that we are all not born in a vacuum. We are born, you know, with our minds influenced right from the beginning by our environments, by our teachers, by our parents. And they have beliefs, some of them irrational beliefs, and many of these beliefs are untrue. But because they have grown up in them, they cannot question them. They're unable to even perceive the level of irrationality in it. When your ego is finally pushed to the back burner by the practice of Taiji, your ability to distinguish between truth and illusion grows. That is perceived in some cases as a dangerous thing by some religious people. But as far as I'm concerned, no religion was created by God. God is God, and religion is a man made thing. And so, not believing in a religion does not mean one does not believe in God. And knowing things does not necessarily mean that one must always express them or say them. And not saying them does not disqualify one from knowing them. So I could say a whole lot of things about this. I could say a whole lot more, but I'll probably keep this for another day. You know, the long and short of it is I have practiced Tai Chi Chuan for the better part of my life. Never once have I encountered anything negative, either in myself or in my environment, or seen any apparitions which were terrifying or distorting or negative. And neither do I entertain aggression, anger, or thoughts of violence towards other beings. Instead, what I have had is peace. What I have experienced is just peace. And that peace is worth it. For those who have never experienced it, you have no idea what it could be. It doesn't mean you will not encounter any problems in your life again once you practice. That's not true. You're here to live this life, to experience it, to make decisions, and so on. But what will happen is, regardless of your circumstances, regardless of everything happening, you will know peace. You will be happy not because of what you have, not because of any material thing, but just because happiness, joy lives inside of you. Like I said, it's not easy to explain, but I could explain in many more ways. And someday I might touch on this topic a little bit more deeply, explain a little bit more than what I have said today. But for today, I wish you a great time and a beautiful day from Zhujiajiao in Shanghai.